Hello Quilty friends, in this video we are going to talk about squaring up your ghost blocks and putting your whole quilt top together except for borders. Borders will be the last video. The first thing we're going to do is square up our ghost blocks. You'll notice that your fabric was overcut. These blocks need to finish at these blocks need to square up to 14 inches. And you started with a 15-inch square of fabric, or maybe slightly larger. The reason for that is when you applique, sometimes the fabric kind of does this, and so by overcutting the block, we've accounted for that shrinkage that you might get and guaranteeing that you'll still get a nice 14-inch block. All right, so there's different ways to square up, and the one I'm going to use today is different than one you would use if this block was traditionally pieced, like your 9-patch blocks were. Your 9-patch blocks were traditionally pieced. This is applique, so we're going to square this block up differently than we would a pieced block. The easiest way to do this is to have a really big ruler. This is an 18-inch square ruler, and it's going to allow us to square up anything smaller than 18 inches square. So here's the first thing we're going to do is take our ghost block and we're going to fold it. We're going to fold it in half this way, and you want to make sure your raw edges are matching up as much as possible, and depending on how wonky your block got while you were appliquing, it might not square up exactly even. So I'm keeping these raw edges over here together. This side isn't cooperating quite as well. Now I'm going to fold it this way. Oh, there's the ghost. And I'm going to find the outside edge over here. What I want to do is get a friction pen, and remember, friction pens, the marks come away with heat, and I'm going to mark the center of the block. So I've got a little purple dot in the middle of my ghost. Okay, I'll make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see. Okay, now I'm not using the marks on the mat at all. I'm going to take my ruler, and I want this block to square up to 14 inches. Half of 14 is 7, and I know, math facts probably weren't a lot of people's favorite. But we need to find the 7-inch line on this side and the 7-inch line here and find where they intersect. And we're going to lay that intersection on our purple dot. And now this part gets sort of, how do you want your block to look? All we want here is we want fabric hanging over both edges, and we want to make sure there's fabric going past the 14-inch line here and the 14-inch line here. What this means is when I'm done, my block is going to look like that. And my ghost is really pretty centered, so I'm pretty happy with that. I am going to turn it just a little bit. So again, 7-inch line and 7-inch line where they intersect is on the dot, and I'm making sure there's fabric hanging past the 14-inch line on both sides of this square. Now I'm going to cut here. I'm going to cut all the fabric hanging off the edge. If you have a 14-inch square ruler, you can just plop that ruler right on here, arrange it so that you like the way the ghost looks under the ruler, and then just trim off all 4 sides of fabric. Now I'm going to turn my ghost so that the sides that I just cut are over here, and I'm going to line up the edges I just trimmed with my 14-inch line here and my 14-inch line here. The lines on the mat are messing me up. Okay, so I'm lined up 14 inches here and 14 inches here. And now I'm just going to trim away I have a 14-inch square ghost. And I can take him to the iron and take away his little purple dot. All right, so there's that guy. And now I have one more, so I can show you one more time. And this guy, if you look, I'm noticing he's quite a bit down here and he's not as far this way. So as I start to line this up, I'm going to make sure and notice where this part is sitting on my, what would be my finished piece. So I'm going to start by finding the center of the block. I'm going to keep all my corners together if I can. So I'm just going to put a little mark and then open them up, and I like to make the mark just a little bit bigger so it's easy to find under the ruler. And now I'm going to start this way so I can really make sure I'm playing with this edge. Okay. So I have about a 1/2 inch hanging over here. And I would like this to be a little bit farther away from that edge. So what I'm going to do is keep my dot on the line here that's 7 inches down, and I'm going to scoot the ruler over this way so that I have some fabric hanging off here, but not a lot. So I'm going to trim this edge, and look over here, and I've got plenty hanging over my 14-inch line here, and I've got some hanging over my 14-inch line down here. So I'm going to be able to trim again when I turn it. So I cut this off. Cut that off. And now I turn this, and I'm going to line up the 2 edges I just trimmed with my 14-inch line. So 14 inches here and the 14-inch line here. He looks good. So now I have a nice square ghost. If you didn't have a big square like this, you can still square up with a long skinny ruler. It's not as easy, but you can do it. The first thing I would actually consider doing is taking a couple pieces of paper and taping them together so you have a 14-inch square, okay? And then you could lay your 14-inch square of paper over your ghost, and you can use your ruler that way to just trim up all the way around. The other way you can do this is using the lines on your mat. You would lay your ghost, you would lay your ghost on here, and you would lay him so he's over the edges, and you would trim up at 14 and 14 measuring on your mat, and then you would turn your ghost, the 2 edges you cut, and you would line them up in the corner, and then you trim at 14 and 14, okay? So there's plenty of ways to square up your ghosts. The important thing is that when you're done, they measure at 14 inches square. Now we're going to put your whole quilt top together, and you can see I've got the first 2 rows put together. And what you'll notice is that this quilt is just a big 9 patch. Just like you had 9 blocks, 9 squares to put together in this block, the quilt is the same thing. You have 3 rows of 3 blocks that you need to sew together. So you are going to sew them together the exact same way you constructed your 9 patch block. You're going to sew your top row together, and you're going to press your seams open. You're going to sew your middle row together and press your seams open. And now I'm going to sew the bottom row together and press the seams open. Make sure your ghosts are oriented the way you want them to be. So I liked them I liked them all kind of leaning different ways. And you'll notice I fixed my cat block from the last video where I had that messed up. And now what we're gonna do is we're going to sew the ghosts to the edges.
Which one that goes there?
You want him over here?
Well, he's opposite that one.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay. I toyed with the idea of having one ghost be upside down, but we're not gonna do that. So we're gonna sew this ghost onto this block. And if the edges of your 9 patch aren't even, you're gonna have troubles lining them up. So you wanna make sure that your 9 patch blocks are all even. So we're making sure our raw edges are all together. And I'm gonna sew with this side up so that I can make sure my seam allowances stay flat. You've got your 1/4 inch foot on your machine. You want your stitch length to be at 1.8, and you can use any color thread you want. I'm just using a neutral color thread. Make sure our edges. Okay. You don't have to backstitch at the beginning and the end because you're going to sew over these seams later on. You can cut it. And what we want when we open this up are the edges to be flat at the top and bottom. We want our purple and our yellow blocks to be even, and they are. So now we're going to sew the other ghost onto the other side of the 9 patch. This way. You want to make sure your ghost is going the direction you want the ghost to go. I always find when these blocks get bigger, you want to have some support on this side. Otherwise they fall and they pull and they can pull everything all out of whack. Get started, and then when I get to a point where I didn't have my raw edges exactly together, so I'm stopping to make sure that I've got them exactly together. Oh man. And you can see my seams went. I'll fix that. So see? It doesn't matter how much you sew, you always end up ripping something. I'm going to have to fix that before I put the whole quilt together. But what we're going to do is we're going to press our seams that we just made. We're going to press as we sewed to lock our stitches up. And then we're going to press open. And then just like with our 9 patch, we're going to press our seams so that they nest. Because I have those first 2 rows sewn together already. The top row, I actually did these the opposite of the way we did our 9 patch. I pressed these guys towards the middle and I press these seams out. And the reason I did that was because of the way the seams all came together on the back of the haunted house block. It was easier. So you press these seams towards the middle, these seams out. So on our bottom row, we're going to press them towards the middle. So we're going to press our seams this way, and then you're going to attach this block to the bottom row the same way you did with your 9 patch. Okay? You're going to pin it so they're nesting, and then you're going to sew your big long seam, and then you're going to press those seams open. Okay? So go ahead and do that, and then you will be ready to add the borders, which is the final step of your quilt top.